I just finished packing a 20-foot U-Haul truck. I didn't really enjoy driving such big cars, but it would probably save us hundreds of dollars in moving costs. Mia was going to follow me in her car with the kids. We should be in town by mid-afternoon. I was looking forward to these changes. Although I loved living in Stanhope, I knew Mia couldn't wait to get back to town. This was where she grew up and studied. I met most of her friends, and they were mostly normal. Mostly. There were some stories that I think she was hiding from me. I knew she had quite a troubled past, but as I reasoned, her experiences made her the one I married, and my experiences did the same for her. I grew to love her over time, I knew that, but from time to time I doubted some of my decisions. Because of this and one particular incident, we almost got married. The circumstances surrounding our wedding were not ideal, but let's start from the beginning. I think this will be better understood with some background. I graduated from Stanhope State University with a business degree. The summer after my junior year, I interned at Northern Forest Products as a broker assistant. NFP sold timber all over the world. The main office was located on the Stanhope campus. I enjoyed learning about wood, building materials, and the different customers who purchased our products. It was a fast-paced job. Besides products and customers, I learned a couple of important things about business. Firstly, it was a high-pressure job, with targets, deadlines, and pressure to deliver results. Secondly, the guys who were good at it made a lot of money. After graduating, I started working as a sales intern at NFP. I worked for an experienced broker named Larry Belinsky. Larry was a big, somewhat careless guy who knew the lumber business. For the first 6 weeks, Larry and I worked side by side in the office, and I learned a lot. After a few weeks, Larry rarely showed up at the office. I quickly realized that you don't have to be physically in the office to run a business. Most of the time, it was just talking to people literally all over the world selling wood. As the months went by, I did more and more of Larry's work. I never knew exactly how much he made from commissions, but I heard enough to know that it was a lot. In the meantime, I received a fixed salary as an intern. The key, as I soon learned in this business, was to tell the truth and gain people's trust. Later, I came to the conclusion that this same lesson applies not only to business, also in relationships. We'll discuss all this soon. After about a year of working at NFP, Larry started coming to the office less and less. I realized that he was starting to have health problems. He had been divorced from his third wife for over a year. Despite his income, he lived in a modular house in a park on the east side of Stanhope. He may have been a good lumber salesman, but his personal life was a mess. Between the office and Larry's house in East Stanhope, there was a bar called the Timbers. It wasn't surprising to see his old Chevy Tahoe parked a little sloppily in the Timbers parking lot at all hours of the day. On Monday, almost 2 years into my tenure at NFP, I walked into the office and the atmosphere was depressing. It quickly became known that Larry had suffered a stroke and was now in a rehabilitation center. No one knew what his long-term prognosis would be, but he was not expected to return to work. In the meantime, we had business to run. That Monday afternoon, I was called into the sales manager's office. We talked briefly about Larry and then quickly moved on to business and plans for the future. "We're not going to give you all of his clients," he told me, "but you do a good job, Patrick. You'll get most of it." I was glad that they thought I was good enough to take on at least some of Larry's clients. In fact, our business has grown since I've worked with Larry. It was only a few weeks later that I realized the financial implications of my new status. My first monthly commission check was just over $14,000, and this was not even for a whole month. That Friday, when I got home, I did some quick calculations. Even in the worst-case scenario, I calculated that I would make a good, low, six-figure income. I was excited and high spirits. I also felt some regret for Larry, but the reality was that I didn't know him very well. I needed something to celebrate. I called my friend Tim Paris. Tim was still studying, getting his master's degree. "Price, what's going on?" he replied. He always called me by my last name. I explained that I wanted to take him out for dinner and a few drinks to celebrate. Celebrate what? He asked. I said I'll explain later. We decided to meet at Pancho's, an upscale Latin restaurant with a great bar. One of those places you didn't allow yourself to go to in college, but always wanted to. On Friday evening, it was full. A combination of professionals and recently graduated students in their first jobs. I explained to Tim about my new, profitable NFP situation. I didn't tell him the exact numbers, but I did hint at how much I expected to earn. Price, he began, you know I'm getting an MBA in finance. I interned at a finance company last year and got an offer to start in June. We need to put together a financial plan for you. And we started talking about my plan. As we talked, the restaurant became increasingly crowded. We stood at a high bistro table with stools for four. A large group began to invade our space. While Tim and I were discussing edifs, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. I turned around and saw a tall, stunning, dark-haired woman, more like a girl, smiling and looking at me. "Are you using this chair?" she asked, still smiling. I wasn't usually a very outgoing person. I wasn't an introvert, just level-headed. But today, buoyed by my financial success, I was in high spirits. "We'll use it," I said, "but for you, I'll be glad to give it away," I said, smiling back at her. She thanked me and moved it a few inches, staying fairly close to Tim and me. Tim chatted briefly with a thin blonde woman standing opposite the one I was talking to. The tall girl smiled at me again, sitting down on the chair and turning to her friends. A few minutes later, I asked the girl next to me to buy them a drink. They agreed, and the four of us started chatting. The evening continued with drinks and conversation. I found out that the girl with dark hair is called Mia Duran. She graduated from Stanhope State University with a degree in marketing and worked for a local advertising company in Stanhope. The more time I spent with her, the more I liked her. Dark hair, beautiful eyes, and a great smile. She was tall, probably 5'8", and had a slim body with nice breasts, as far as I could tell without staring too much. We left Poncho's and went to a smaller local bar called Pinocchio's. It was a little quieter there, and we ordered some appetizers and more drinks. The night became a little foggy from all the drinks, and at some point I realized that Tim and the blonde were gone. "Well," Mia began, "it's pretty late. I only live a few blocks from here," she said. I gallantly offered to walk her home. We walked up to her door, and she turned to enter the code to open the door. She opened the door, turned back, and we were just inches apart. She looked at me, and we kissed. A kiss full of passion with locked mouths and caresses. We stumbled into the condominium. Soon we found ourselves in the bedroom almost naked, kissing each other, taking off our clothes and caressing various parts of our bodies. There was little light, barely illuminating the bedroom. I took a breath and looked over Mia's naked body. Not skinny, more like dense legs, but by no means flabby. She had a thin waist that emphasized the size and shape of her breasts. Naked, her breasts were the main focus. The combination of alcohol and sex took over both of us. After individual trips to the bathroom, we both fell into bed. I woke up in the middle of the night and needed to go to the bathroom again. When I walked out, I almost ran into her roommate, the blonde girl who was with Tim. "Oh," she exclaimed, surprised by me. She looked at my naked body. She smiled as she closed the bathroom door. I fell asleep again, snuggled into the warmth of Mia's body. Several hours must have passed when I felt her move. I looked and saw her sitting naked on the edge of the bed, her back turned to me. I reached out and stroked her back. After a moment, she answered. "Good morning," she said, her back still turned to me. "I need to take a shower," she announced. My hand, which had been caressing her back, slid and cupped her left breast. "Yeah, you need to," I said. "I guess I'll have to help you wash up." We took an erotic shower. I soaped her whole body. When we came out, the blonde was sitting at the small kitchen table. "Good morning," she smiled when she saw us. "There's only one bathroom. What's your name?" she asked when I returned to Mia's room. "Patrick Price," I told her, barely holding the towel. We both got dressed, chatting about the night and occasionally smiling at each other. We went out and sat at the table for breakfast and drank coffee. Eventually, I realized I had to go, but I enjoyed their company. I found out that the blonde's name was Lisa Shea, and she was a good friend of Mia. Also found out that Tim spent some time with her. He didn't stay all night. She said, "I'm engaged," she explained. As if that explained anything. I'll have to check with Tim, I thought. Well, I think it's time for me to find my car, I told the girls. Mia walked me to the door and kissed me goodbye. I had a great time with you, Patrick. Text me, she said. I left happy and satisfied. I met an attractive, beautiful girl with possibly the best breasts I have ever touched. I was still excited about my new financial situation. I was in a good mood. I thought about Mia for a couple of days before I contacted her. Like I said, she was beautiful, fun to be with, and good in bed. But as I thought, I was not a casual dater. If I was going to put energy into a relationship, I wanted to know there was a long-term future. I called her midweek. "Hi," she replied cheerfully. "How are you, Patrick?" I could tell she was happy to hear from me. "Glad you called," she continued. "I was hoping this wasn't another one-off adventure." Another, I thought. I put those thoughts aside for now. We agreed to meet on the weekend. We started dating over the next few weeks, seeing each other mostly on weekends, usually staying at my apartment, sometimes hers. A typical date consisted of dinner, a couple of drinks, and then heading back to my apartment for some fantastic sex. Sometimes we ran into friends, mostly Mia's friends. I saw Mia's neighbor Lisa a few times and decided to ask my friend Tim what happened that first night. I called him on the way home from work one day. "Price, how are you?" Tim responded good-naturedly. "Still making big money? Now that I'm working full-time at Investment Advisors, we really need to make a plan for you." I agreed, and we chatted for a few minutes. Finally, I started talking about the night we met Mia and Lisa. I asked him what happened, citing alcohol as the reason for my poor memory. "Oh man," Tim began. "After we went to the second bar, she almost dragged me back to her apartment. You seem to be doing great with the dark-haired girl." I agreed. Anyway, we got there, and she started stripping before she even walked through the door. We jumped into bed, and she was wild. Fun, but almost too much. After we had sex, Tim continued, she told me I had to leave. Her boyfriend or fiancé wasn't sure what was what, came late sometimes, and had a bad temper. It was really interesting. I hadn't met the groom, but I knew who he was, Mitch, something like that. I think I got dressed and left in about 60 seconds. I was going to find you, but I just called an Uber. "Crazy night. How are you?" he asked. Another weird thing she said to me. I almost forgot about it. "What?" I asked him. As I was leaving, she told me and stay away from Mia. Last time Mitch slept over, she almost slept with him. Everything was a blur. Then I heard her laugh, so I thought it must be some kind of inside joke. Tim finished. This got me thinking. Was there really something between Mia and Lisa's boyfriend? Not likely, it was probably just a joke, Tim thought. I told him I had a good evening, but didn't go into detail. He quickly changed the subject. "Hey, there's a Stanhope Stars home football game next week. The company has tickets. Do you want to go?" I definitely wanted to, and we agreed on a game on Saturday. I loved the September football games. The weather is usually good, unlike the rainy, cold games in November. Mia and I continued dating, and everything was going great. I have to say that deep down, I was a little worried about Mia. She didn't do anything specific to make me suspicious, but because of a few things she mentioned about her lifestyle, she seemed wilder to me than I was used to. The following weekend was Labor Day. I asked her if she wanted to go hiking with me. I told her how much I loved being outdoors, hiking, fishing, and sometimes rock climbing. "You mean," she asked hesitantly, "sleeping in a tent?" I assured her that she would enjoy it. I had all the equipment, and I promised that she would have a good time. She agreed with noticeably less enthusiasm than usual. This weekend, the weather was perfect. We stayed at a state park with more modern amenities rather than portable toilets. We cooked on a camp stove and lit a fire in the fire pit in the evening. By mid-Saturday, she began to let go of her doubts and really began to enjoy nature. That night around the fire, she asked me what we would do tomorrow. "Have you ever fished?" I asked. She wasn't fishing, so I told her about a secret fishing spot I knew. "We'll have to walk a few miles to get there, but it'll be worth it." I told her, and she agreed to try. The next day we got up early. We had backpacks, fishing gear, water, and snacks for the hike. I've fished in this creek before. You had to cross the stream at a certain point to get to the fishing spot. I've never seen anyone else here when I've fished this area. We set up camp, and I prepared the rod and reel for Mia and showed her how it worked. I told her to try it on a large flat rock over a clear pool. I said I would go up the creek a bit, but this pool would be a good place for her. Over the next hour, I caught several fish. One was a good-sized rainbow trout. I had to explain catch and release to Mia. I was a little upstream from where we were when I heard Mia scream excitedly. I caught one," she screamed. She caught a medium-sized trout. I took a photo of her with the fish. She was very excited. "Okay," she began, "I'm retiring. I'm going to lie on a towel on this big flat rock and sunbathe." I laughed and said that I would fish a little more upstream. I fished for a while and then slowly began to make my way back to our spot. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. I walked closer, peering through the trees. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Quietly and carefully, I took off my clothes, folded them on the shore, and crept up to her. Mia lay naked on a towel, her legs slightly spread on the stone. She was wearing sunglasses and looked like she might be sleeping. While she lay there, I pressed my mouth to her breast. At first she was scared, but then she moved on the towel, enjoying the sensation. Needless to say, I made love to her in the open air, not caring that anyone might see us. It was fun and exciting, and we both loved it. I was glad she brought condoms. After that, going back, not only the physical intimacy of our sex, but the experiences we had together, camping, fishing, and her acceptance of these new activities strengthened my feelings for her. That night by the fire, Mia put her head on my shoulder and hugged me, whispering in my ear. "You know, Patrick," she began, "I'm starting to like you." I smiled, feeling the same strong feelings for her. I thought we had just passed an important stage in our relationship. It was a good weekend. We usually met at least once during the week. This week, we decided to have dinner on Wednesday night. While we were drinking wine, we started talking about the upcoming weekend. She mentioned a party on Saturday night. "It's at Mitch's friend's," she told me. Mitch Markham was the fiancé of her roommate Lisa Shea. I met him a couple of times, and he seemed like a normal guy with a big ego, kind of like a frat bro. I also knew a friend of his who was having a party. "I'm not sure I can," I told Mia. "The football game is on Saturday. They usually end pretty late." "Oh, right," she said. "I really wanted to go to the party with you." I told her I would try, and we continued talking about other things. That Saturday, Tim and I went to the match. The Stars played a ranked team, and the stadium was filled to capacity. We had a couple of beers before the game and another one at halftime. Surprisingly, the game was still closed going into the fourth quarter. The other team led by 3 points and was heading for the final touchdown with less than a minute left. Their quarterback threw a lateral pass that was slightly adjusted by our defender. The pass rush was called off, and our safety caught the ball out of the air and returned it for a Stars touchdown. The Stars beat their opponent. The entire stadium exploded. Tim and I remained surrounded by the celebrants for some time. Eventually, we began to slowly leave the stadium in high spirits. Although it was late, almost 11:30, we were full of energy from the football match. "Hey," I said to Tim, "want to come to that party?" He agreed. I started thinking about Mia. If she goes, maybe we can meet and finish the evening at my place. My excitement increased. When we got to the apartment, the party was still in full swing. Tim and I went to the keg and grabbed beers while talking to various people we knew. I also scanned the crowd for Mia. I haven't seen her yet. Tim got pulled aside with a girl he knew, and I was just hanging out by the keg, chatting. I stood with my back to two guys, students, judging by their conversation. I heard them discussing the girls, making comments. It was fun to eavesdrop on them. "Look at this," one of them said. "She looks like she just had sex." The comment caught my attention, and I turned to see them looking up the stairs. I saw a girl and some guy coming down the stairs. Her arm was wrapped around him. She was pressing against him. She looked a little disheveled. Her hair is disheveled, and her makeup is slightly smudged. But there was no doubt who it was and what she was doing. The guys behind me described her exactly. She really looked like she had just gotten laid, and as you might have guessed, I recognized her without a doubt. It was Mia. I froze for a moment. My first instinct was to approach her, but then I hesitated. I didn't want to make a scene at this party. I've seen situations like this before. It was always dirty and humiliating. I decided to leave. I sent Tim a quick message. At these parties, it's every man for himself. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. On the way home, I thought a lot. Mia and I did not agree on any official relationship. We did not make promises of fidelity to each other. I guess I couldn't blame her, but I also didn't want to be in a relationship with a woman who would sleep with me one week and someone else the next. I reasoned that I shouldn't be angry with her, but I also thought about what I wanted. I wanted something more than just casual encounters. It was obvious that our goals were different. By the time I got to my apartment, I had come to a conclusion. No angry scenes, just an immediate end to our relationship. I have to admit that I really started to care about her. I was sad and I knew I would miss her. But I decided what I wanted and what she apparently wanted were two different things. The next day, Sunday, I just went about my normal weekend routine. I washed my car, washed my clothes, and ran. What I didn't do was contact Mia. In the middle of the day, I received a message. "How was the game?" I didn't answer. That evening, there was another message. "What are you doing? Do you want to have dinner?" I didn't answer again. I went to bed, still sad, but determined. On Monday at work, she called me on my mobile. I didn't answer and let the call go to voicemail. Monday night after work and a run before dinner, I was home in my apartment watching the Monday night football game. I heard a knock on the door. I guessed who it might be and thought for a moment about answering. But then I thought that this meeting would happen sooner or later. Let it happen better now. I told myself, don't get angry, stay calm. I opened the door. "Hello," she said as I opened the door. "Where have you been?" she asked with a big, happy smile on her face. She tried to hug me in greeting. My reaction was not what she expected. I patted her woodenly on the back, without enthusiasm. She stopped and looked at me with a puzzled expression on her face. I was always kind to her. She realized that something had changed. "How are you?" she asked, studying my face, still not understanding my change in behavior. I told her I was fine without going into detail. "Why didn't you call me?" she asked. "Didn't you receive my messages?" I told her I didn't have time. It was obvious that she didn't believe it. "Are you angry about something?" she asked. I took a deep breath and sat down on the kitchen chair. "Listen, Mia," I began. "I think you and I want different things from this." I paused. "Relationship. We had a good time, and it was nice getting to know you, but I think we're two different people." She studied my face, her smile fading, her brow furrowed, trying to figure out what was going on. "You're breaking up with me?" she asked. "After everything we've done together, hiking and fishing. That was just a week ago. We had a great time. What happened? I thought everything was going well." I saw that she was starting to get upset. She just looked at me, not understanding. Finally, I started. I told her I wasn't interested in casual dating. I wanted there to be prospects for a long-term relationship. I told her that I understood that we didn't make promises to each other, but for me, I didn't want to play the field. "I agree, Patrick," she told me. "I want it all too." I sat and looked at her with a slight smile on my face. My head shook from side to side. "What?" she asked. I paused and then started talking about Saturday night. Tim and I went to the football game on Saturday night. She nodded her head. We had a good time. The team won and everyone was in a good mood. I continued, we decided to go to a party. You were there? She interrupted, with a mixed expression on her face. I told her how we arrived and that I hoped to see her. Then I talked about how I was standing at the keg and overheard two guys talking about a girl who looked like she had just gotten laid and how she was walking down the stairs with some tall guy. Then I stopped and just looked at her. The ball was now completely in her court. She was silent for a minute, digesting what I said, comparing things. A party, and then no replies to her messages. Patrick, it was nothing. It was just Blake, the guy I went to St. Thomas's with. I haven't seen him in a long time. He's just a friend. She begged. I sat and looked at her. I was sure of what I saw, and then I asked her the key question. Did you sleep with him? I asked calmly. She started to stutter. Sex? Why do you think we had sex? He's just an old friend from school that I was chatting with. I woke up. Gently but firmly, I led her to the door, placing my hand on her back. She continued to protest. Finally, outside on my porch, I told her I'd think about it, kissed her softly on the cheek, turned, walked into my apartment, and closed the door. I didn't watch as she walked slowly to her car, tears in her eyes. The next year and a half were a mixed bag for me. Everything was going well for me at work. I took the customer base they gave me and almost doubled it. It really wasn't that difficult. As far as I could tell, Larry was barely working half-time. It wasn't hard to improve this. The other good news was that my friend Tim Paris managed my money well. I loved seeing my investments grow at double-digit rates. I was thinking about buying a house. I could definitely afford a substantial down payment. But to be honest, I was lonely. I wanted a woman in my life. I was worried that if I bought a house and lived there alone, it might make things feel lonelier. I've dated several women over the past year or so. Nothing lasts too long. The longest was with a woman named Hillary. Very sweet, attractive in some ways, but smart. She worked for a mid-sized accounting firm. We started dating and eventually had sex. After about 2 months, I realized that something in our relationship was not working. It sounds terrible, but she was making me a little tired. I admit there was nothing wrong with Hillary. Attractive, professional, smart, but I felt that I was not interested. I had an idea why, but I suppressed it for weeks. Finally, one evening, face to face, I broke up with her. She was more surprised than upset. She wanted to know why, and I couldn't give her any satisfactory answer. She ended up getting angry with me. We can still be friends, I told her as she prepared to leave, her food half finished. She still hadn't responded to my friend's request as she turned and left the restaurant. Later, along with my thoughts, my hidden reasons for dissatisfaction with Hillary surfaced. I compared her to Mia. Mia was fun. She wanted to try different things that were sexy and attractive. And in bed, the comparisons became even more one-sided. On the other hand, I was almost sure that Hillary would never cheat on me. These were the vague thoughts I was pondering. Did Mia break me? Can't any other woman compare to this? I haven't seen Mia since the fight at my apartment over a year ago. I learned from friends of friends that she was still in Stanhope. News about her always caught my attention, but I suppressed random thoughts of contacting her. But as fate would have it, our paths crossed. Tim and I were downtown for a charity event at the Roosevelt Hotel. There was dinner, an auction, and a dance band. I was sitting at a table with several couples from the investment company where Tim worked. After dinner, the band started playing, and we chatted and enjoyed the evening. Suddenly, Tim elbowed me in the ribs. "Arrival, 11 o'clock," he whispered to me. Impossible to ignore, I turned and saw Mia. She smiled and walked straight towards me. At least she looked better than I remembered. I turned, smiled at her, and extended my hand for a handshake. She ignored my hand and hugged me tightly. "Hello, stranger," she said to me in greeting. For an awkward moment, we stood in silence, just looking at each other. And then Mia quickly spoke, asking how I was doing, what was new in my life, etc. Pretty soon, we were sitting at another table, chatting and catching up. It's like we just started from where we were last time. It all seemed so familiar and natural. Any mention of what happened at the party remained unspoken. We danced a few times and basically spent the last few hours of the evening together. In fact, we were busy talking, sitting at the table. The group had long since packed up and left, when suddenly the lights in the ballroom began to dim. It was time to go, but it seemed like neither of us wanted the evening to end. Finally, we got up. Mia hugged me again, kissed me mostly on the cheek, turned and headed towards the exit. Halfway there, she stopped and turned back. "Call me," she said, and I nodded. Over the next few days, I continued to be in a mental tug of war. On one hand, I had a great time with Mia at the auction. Definitely the best night I've had in months. On the other hand, I didn't trust her. Did I want to open up to a relationship I didn't believe in? This was my struggle. Finally, after 2 days, I gave in and called her. I promised myself to have fun, enjoy being with her, but be careful. We started dating again. It was familiar and comfortable. Mia also felt like she had changed. Less wild, more stable, more mature. One area where she was no less wild was her sex life. I realized this after we were together for the third time. She was just as cheerful as I remembered her. I unfairly compared her to Hillary. No competition. We went out to dinner one night about a month after we started dating again. Suddenly, Mia's face took on a serious expression. "Patrick," she began, "I think we need to talk about something." Not knowing where this was going, I simply nodded. "I need to explain about Blake." Blake? For a moment, I didn't understand what she was talking about, and then I suddenly remembered. Blake, from the party. This Blake. This will be interesting, I thought. She told me a story. She attended a Catholic high school in the city. Many children went there to get a supposedly better education. Mia left because her grandmother was a devout Catholic. Mia was raised Catholic. She was a little overweight in high school. There was a group of kids there who were sort of the in crowd, the most popular kids in St. Thomas. They were Blake Langley, Taylor White, and Lisa Shea, Mia's roommate. Mia always felt a little outside the inner circle, but there was no doubt. Blake was a king. His family was rich and owned car dealerships in the city. Blake always drove a new car. He was a tall, handsome guy, confident and fun to be around. While most other children experimented with new experiences, such as sex, Mia stuck to her Catholic upbringing. It got into her head that sex was only for marriage. I remembered her whispered words the first time we made love, fiddling with the condom. Mia went on to say that when she entered Stanhope as a freshman, she felt the oppressive burden of her upbringing. "I have to admit," she told me, "I went a little crazy in college." I understood this, and, hearing these words, could not suppress the stings of jealousy. I said nothing. "Another thing happened when I went to college," she told me. "I started training. I took a fitness class as an elective and was interested in it. I gained weight in college. I lost weight." She then said that she started getting even more attention from guys. Not only was she sexually active, but she also looked better. I could confirm this. She had a great body. Then she started talking about the party. She was happy to have a good time and was surprised to meet Blake. She only saw him a few times after school. He suddenly began to pay a lot of attention to her. She remembers how in high school she was always hoping to get Blake's attention, and now it was happening. "It's like I suddenly found myself in a different period of my life, back to high school where popularity was so important. And here I was with the most popular guy in the area, and I didn't have that sexual fixation that I had in high school." One thing led to another, and she fell silent. "And then when I realized I'd lost you over a quick stroll through the hay with a guy I'd barely spoken to in years." She paused. It broke my heart. "I can't tell you how many times I wanted to call you, but you were so cold to me that day. I was afraid. And you want to know the funniest thing," she added. A few weeks later, I found out that Blake was engaged to some girl he met in college back east. I really felt cheap. So that's the story, she told me. I learned my lesson and have changed since then. I simply nodded, taking in the information. It was a plausible explanation. But with Mia, my approach will still be slow and steady. We continued to see each other, usually all weekend and once or twice a week. I was definitely getting a more mature version of Mia, which I appreciated, while at the same time getting a sexually wild Mia behind closed doors. We've been together for almost 3 months since we got back together, and everything has been fine. I was increasingly suppressing the idea that Mia and Blake had sex at the party. I was still going slow, but there was no doubt that we were a strong couple. We did have a discussion about exclusivity, and we both agreed on it. The word love was sometimes whispered in moments of passion, and then everything changed. It was Tuesday evening. Nothing special. We didn't plan to get together that evening. Surprisingly, I heard a knock on the door. It was Mia. She had a strange expression on her face. Not exactly despair, but something like that. I had never seen that look on her before. Something serious had happened. "What's happened?" I asked her. And then she told me. I remembered that night. We drank a little too much wine. The sex that night was especially passionate. There was a small accident with the condom. You can guess what happened next. "I'm not going to catch you," she told me, "but I'm going to keep this baby." We both sat there, suddenly faced with important life decisions. I thought about what I wanted, what she wanted, and what could happen. We talked for a long time that night without making a final decision. I noticed that Mia had changed even more. I saw a new maturity, a bit of a change from the fun-loving girl I first met. Honestly, I liked this new version better. Later, alone, analyzing these new events in my life, I realized one thing. The only thing holding me back was thinking about Mia's past. She was definitely wild during her college years. She talked about it herself. And of course, that night with Blake Langley. She explained it. Sort of, "It still bothered me. I thought I could handle this." But this memory never completely disappeared. I've thought about this a lot. The next few months were a whirlwind. We moved in together and then moved into a 3-room townhouse. Mia was planning her wedding. Her mother helped her. She will be 6 months pregnant at the wedding, so it will be noticeable. The whole time from getting ready for the wedding to the birth of the baby was a crazy, exciting, and nerve-wracking time. My whole life changed dramatically, and in the end, I was glad for it. One moment. The wedding was small. There was no time to plan a big event. Mostly her family, my small family, and friends were present. Friends on both sides. What I didn't know until the last moment was that Blake Langley would be at the wedding. When I found out about this, I protested. "Mia, I don't want this guy at the wedding," I told her. This led to a big controversy. In the end, her logic won out. Langley, Taylor White, Lisa Shea were all friends from school. "These are all my friends from school. I can't invite everyone else and leave Blake out." She paused and continued. "Plus, he'll be with his wife, Bree." I didn't know he was married. I reluctantly agreed. We had a wedding and everything went well. I even met Blake Langley. He behaved in an exemplary manner. I must admit that I even liked him. I didn't trust him, but I liked him. And his wife, Bree, was like a model. Tall, taller than Mia, with long blonde hair and a very attractive body. As if in a whirlwind, after the wedding, we suddenly became parents. Mia gave birth to a boy whom we named Michael. Life has changed for us. Everything now had to be planned. Spontaneity is a thing of the past. But it was good. I loved being a father. And Mia surprised me with what a good mother she became. I talked about how I've seen Mia mature over the years. No longer the crazy student, she was now a beautiful, mature mother who I found even more attractive than the younger version of her. Some things have changed about us as new parents. Mia left her job at an advertising firm to be a full-time mom. She still found time to exercise, and soon her post-pregnancy body was as toned and slender as before. About a year after Michael was born, I returned home to a candlelit dinner. Mia told me that Michael was already asleep. I started to wonder what was going on. "I have a surprise for you," she said with a smile on her face. The surprise was that Mia was pregnant again. We discussed it, and we both agreed that we wanted another child. I just didn't know it would happen so soon. "I think we need to start looking for a house," I announced. We talked about it, but were too busy to do anything. The townhouse we rented had 3 bedrooms, so we had plenty of space. However, we wanted our own home and decided to start looking after the birth of our new baby. A few months later, we received more news. Mia was pregnant with twins. Suddenly, the question of whether we wanted 2 or 3 children was decided for us. The size of our future home now had to accommodate a family of 5. Mia gave birth to twin girls. We named them Cleo and Claire. A little cute, I know, but that's exactly what we wanted, and that's what we named our precious girls. We found a large 2-story house, a little outside the city, and bought it. It's hard to call it a dream home, but it suited our current needs. For the next couple of years, our life was good. Stressful with 3 children, but also filled with joy and homeliness. My work was going well. I started selling non-traditional building materials, and even when conventional markets were slow, I had alternative products to sell. Financially, everything was fine with us. We found a woman who came 3 days a week for a few hours, and this allowed Mia to run errands, go shopping, and go to the gym. The children loved Estrelita, and she became part of our home. "Guess what?" Mia said one evening after I got home from work. "My 10th high school graduation is next summer," she said, waving the invitation. She kept saying that she really wanted to go. We could stay with her mom and grandma in town. We'd take the kids and take a mini vacation to attend homecoming events. Her mother and grandmother will spend time with the children while we are at various events. I agreed, but deep down I was much less excited about the homecoming. I met some of her friends, and they were all pretty nice, but I assumed Blake Langley would be there. It wasn't just that he slept with my wife that bothered me, but that as far as I knew, he was a guy with a huge ego. As it turned out, a program was drawn up for the alumni meeting. Informal meeting at a local bar on a Friday night. There was a formal graduation on Saturday at the Davenport Hotel downtown, and then, if that wasn't enough, a picnic for families at Laurelwood Park on Sunday. We soon drove 2 hours to Mia's mom's house in town, where we planned to stay for the weekend. The next day, there was an event at the Marshfield pub. Right after we arrived, Mia hurried over to a group of girls, including Lisa and a few others I recognized. These were her best friends from school. I remained on the periphery of the crowd. I spotted Langley with Taylor White, Mitch Markham, and some other guys. Even at the alumni reunion, school cliques formed again. I sipped my beer and quietly observed the social interactions. From across the room, I heard Langley speak. He was one of those guys who naturally spoke loudly. I was far away, but I heard almost everything he said. I noticed how he and his group glanced towards the girls and lowered their voices. I thought they even mentioned Mia's name. I watched as they looked at Mia and her friends. Langley whispered something to the group, and they all burst into laughter. I could well imagine the nature of his comment. I turned away from the guys and suddenly recognized someone I knew. It was Teresa Paris, my friend Tim's sister. "Teresa, hi," I began, introducing myself. "Patrick Price, your brother Tim's friend," I said. She looked at me for a moment and then smiled. "Patrick, of course. I remember you," she said. I was glad to see a familiar face at this event. "Patrick," Teresa began, "this is my husband, Ryan O'Malley." We shook hands and smiled. Ryan was slim, wore glasses, dressed conservatively, and had a pleasant appearance. Not the frat boy image of Langley and company. I learned that Ryan attended St. Thomas, and he and Teresa now live in the city in the Garlington area. I told them that I was married to Mia Duran. Ryan said he knew her in school, but I had a feeling that he wasn't hanging out with the same people. Like a social lifeline, I clung to Teresa and Ryan, pleasantly comparing our college and post-college years. I learned that Ryan is a civil engineer and Teresa teaches high school health. Eventually, they left, and I turned to check on Mia and how long we had to be here. I saw that her group of friends had merged with Langley and his boys. I felt a pang of jealousy when I noticed Mia standing next to Langley. I walked over and squeezed myself between Langley and Mia and asked her how she was. I surprised her, but then she kissed me on the cheek. She introduced me to her friends again, and everyone seemed nice. Langley was especially friendly, asking me about children, work, and other superficial topics. I have to admit that he was charming, but there was something about him that I just couldn't trust. Later, as we were driving home, Mia talked about how much she missed her friends from school. I told her about the meeting with Teresa and her husband. I asked Mia where Bree, Langley's beautiful wife, was. "They are no longer together," was all she said. The next evening was the more formal of a series of homecoming events. Mia wore a low-cut dress that showed off a little cleavage. She looked very good. On the way to the hotel, I stated that I would be the designated driver. At the event, I drank light beer, and Mia and all her friends drank cocktails. I spotted Langley, White, Markham, and the same group of guys from last night, all drinking and laughing together. I approached this group. We chatted, and I learned a little more about them. The Langley family owned a local Toyota dealership in town, and he was the general manager. It turned out that Mitch Markham was a sales manager there and worked for Langley. Taylor White was an attorney, and Langley Motors was one of his clients. Langley and White lived in Garlington Heights, not far from where Teresa and Ryan O'Malley lived. In the end, I left after an unexpectedly pleasant conversation with these guys. They all seemed like people I would have become friends with under other circumstances. But still, and I couldn't say exactly why, I didn't trust Blake Langley. Probably because I knew that he slept with my wife during those years. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it out of my head. Later, there was a time for dancing. Mia and I danced a few songs, and I could tell she was on the verge of drinking too much. She danced with several guys, including Langley. Without attracting attention, I watched them as they danced. I didn't notice anything out of place. Later, on the way home, I thought that perhaps my wariness about Mia's guy friends from school was not justified. For the most part, they seemed like decent people, and any negative feelings towards them were misguided. Yes, Langley had a big ego and showed off a bit. But is it really that bad? The next day, there was a picnic in the park. The weather was good. I estimated that about half of the participants had young children, just like us. Michael had just turned 3, and twins Claire and Cleo were 14 months old and trying to master the art of walking. There were a lot of activities. A couple of guys were throwing a ball, and someone was trying to organize a volleyball game. With 3 young children, my activities were centered on them. Mia and I were trying to feed the kids peanut butter and jelly sandwiches when Langley and Lisa approached. "Pat, we need a volleyball player for volleyball. Are you with us?" Langley asked. I loved volleyball. I played in the town league in Stanhope before Michael was born. "Thanks, buddy," I told him. "I have my hands full." Pointing at my children, Lisa intervened and told me that she would help Mia with the kids so I could play. I hesitated for just a moment and then joined the game. I saw that they had recruited Ryan O'Malley and a few others. About half the players knew how to play, and the other half knew about as much as could be learned in gym class. It was fun at first, but pretty quickly the guys on the other side, including Langley and Markham, became competitive. Both of these guys were over 6 feet tall and athletic. They started scoring goals. Obviously, my team was losing if anyone was keeping score at all. At some point, I saw someone set up the ball for Langley's next shot. As I said, I really played a lot of volleyball. The moment he went for the shot, I jumped right at my side of the net with my arms outstretched. I blocked the kick straight back, and the ball ricocheted off Langley's head. My team cheered this move, and for a moment I saw a look of anger flash across Langley's face. But it quickly disappeared, and a smile appeared on his face. "Good block, Pat," he shouted to me. After that, the level of play on the other side increased. More blows and light verbal sparring continued. It was no longer a friendly, carefree game. She became serious. At one point, Langley aimed a punch right at Ryan O'Malley's face. It looked intentional. Ryan's glasses flew off, and I saw him put his hand to his face. It seemed to hurt. I lifted his glasses and told the group that I was done. Everyone urged me to continue, but I ignored them as Ryan and I walked back to where Teresa was sitting. Ryan never complained about the punch to the face, but it had to hurt. At first, with all the kids buckled in the car, Mia was in a good mood, talking happily about her friends as we drove out of town and home to Stanhope. About halfway home, she became silent and withdrawn. "Hey, what happened?" I asked. "Is everything okay?" At first, she didn't answer me, quietly looking out the window. By then, I already knew the right strategy. Remain silent and wait for her answer. Finally, she answered. "I miss my friends," she said. "I also miss my mom and grandma," she added. She continued to talk about how much her mother and grandmother loved spending time with their children and how much help it provided her. "I always imagined that my children would grow up with my family and friends," she said. "Stanhope is fine, but I miss the city." I thought for a few minutes. I didn't need to be geographically close to the office. I could easily attend our periodic sales meetings. Even Tim Paris left Stanhope and lived in a suburb outside the city. There really was nothing to keep us in Stanhope. I started to consider the possibility of moving. Our home in Stanhope sold quickly, and we made a significant profit. We ended up buying a house in a nice neighborhood in Garlington, around the corner from Teresa and Ryan O'Malley. We became friends with them, but they were more my friends than Mia's friends. We weren't too far from her mom and grandma either. It was also convenient. Mia often saw friends, but full-time motherhood of 3 small children took up most of our time. I was very happy to see what a wonderful mother Mia was. When I think back to those early days of her fun and wild lifestyle, I could come to no other conclusion than that she had really matured. Sometimes madness manifests itself, but not very often. Life in the city was good for us. For my business, it didn't matter where I lived. The house we bought was quite large, 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. There was an unfinished room in the basement, and I set up an office there for myself. Over the next year, we settled into our home and became accustomed to life in the city. I loved spending time with the children, and Mia, as I said, was a wonderful mother. Socially, we spent some time with her old friends from St. Thomas. We also hung out with Ryan and Teresa O'Malley, and sometimes with my old college friend Tim Paris, Teresa's brother. Overall, at this stage, our relationship was great, the kids were doing well, and we were more than stable financially. We loved our house and our neighborhood, and we were fairly close to Mia's mom's house. What could go wrong? That Friday, we had a sales meeting in Stanhope. I stayed at the office for a while and returned home for dinner. When I got home, it was the usual cheerful bustle of taming the kids, getting them into high chairs, putting on bibs, and preparing for the barrage of spilled drinks, knocked down utensils, and splattered food all over the kitchen table. "I have something exciting to tell you," Mia smiled and said. "What?" I asked. "Later," she replied. Finally, after all the kids had been fed, bathed, dressed in pajamas, tucked in, and stories had been read to them, I walked downstairs to find Mia looking at her iPad in the cafeteria. "So what's going on?" I asked. "Oh, Patrick," she began, "I have an amazing opportunity. I talked to my mom, and I think it will work out." I was silent, letting the conversation take its course. In the end, I knew that all the important points would come out. "I was in the park with the kids, and I met Lisa and her daughters," she began. "We went to her house, and Mitch was home for dinner. He was in a bad mood." She went on to say that Mitch's job as head of sales and marketing at Langley Motors was stressful and overwhelming. He said he needed a part-time marketing assistant, some for 20 hours a week. She stopped there and looked at me, smiling. I was a little puzzled at first. What does Mitch's marketing assistant have to do with it? And then it dawned on me. "You, I asked, and she nodded, still smiling. How the hell are you going to work 20 hours a week? I exclaimed. She then explained this complicated plan in which her mother would come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Mitch said that the hours were flexible and she could work from home if necessary. I didn't like this plan for several reasons. We didn't need the money, and to be honest, it would have created more stress for me. I protested calmly. I tried to poke holes in her plan, but she thought it through and had the answers. I objected that we didn't need money. Patrick, it's not about the money. I have a higher education and I want to use it. I love children, but there are times when I want to interact with other adults. I really want this, she added. I still have to interview, she said, but Mitch already asked when I could start. I thought, my main concerns concerned the children. They were still young, and like I said, Mia was a wonderful mother. My secondary concern was, selfishly, about me. It was already quite difficult to juggle my job while working from home. Now, with her job and my mother-in-law being here with the kids most of the time, I imagined more interruptions. Finally, I gave in with the statement, let's give it a try. As expected, Mia got the job. The first few weeks were a bit challenging between understanding the car business and being away from the kids. Mia was with them 24/7 for most of their lives. We eventually found a rhythm. Her mom handled the kids well on the days Mia worked, and any concerns I had about my work productivity disappeared. Mia was in a better mood too, as she better understood her role in the business. She was happier and more confident. Taking a break from childcare a few days a week actually had a more positive impact. At first, this happened every few weeks. I hardly paid any attention. But suddenly, I realized that her part-time job had become something closer to full-time work. We started discussing this at some point, and it turned into an argument. She later apologized and said she would talk to Mitch about her watch. A few weeks later, we were invited to a party at Blake Langley's house in Garlington Heights. Blake was there with an attractive young woman I had never met before. Mitch and Taylor and several others were also there with their wives. Blake, on his best host behavior, really radiated charm at me. Like I said, he can be really funny, and I had my full attention. Mia does a very good job in her marketing role. The business is growing, and I have to say Mia's great work has helped with that, he told me. In total, there were about 20 people at the party. The weather was good, and everyone was out in the yard around the pool. I drank 2 light beers all evening, knowing that later I would have to drive a short distance home. I was talking to a group of guys about the upcoming Stanhope football season and lost track of time. It got dark, and while we were talking, I looked up to check where Mia was. I looked around the backyard. I saw Lisa. Mia was usually next to her. Mia was not there. Then I wondered where Langley was. I looked around. He wasn't there either. Did I worry too much? For my own peace of mind, I decided to look around. Calmly but decisively, I left the conversation about sports. I walked towards the sliding doors leading into the house. There was no one in the kitchen. I walked down the corridor to the bathroom. She looked busy. I walked around the corner into the living room and saw stairs leading to the second floor. By this time, I was already excited. My mind flashed back to scenes from that party years ago, with Langley and Mia walking down the stairs. I was ready to go up the stairs when I heard a voice from the corridor. It was Langley. "Pat," he began, "are you looking for the bathroom?" he asked. I saw movement behind him in the dark corridor. I immediately went to him. What were they doing together in the dark part of the house? Suddenly, I realized that Olivia, his young girlfriend, was with him. Suddenly, I felt like a complete idiot. "Yes," I muttered. "I was looking for the bathroom," I lied. Langley looked at me strangely. I almost did something stupid. He probably noticed my strange behavior. He led me to the second-floor bathroom, still a charming host. After I used the bathroom, I returned to the party with a red face and saw Mia with Lisa, Mitch, and a small group of people. Everything seemed normal. I scolded myself. Since we got married, she has never given me a reason to doubt her. That old memory of her and Langley kept popping up in my thoughts. Just let it go, I told myself. Later, when we were driving home, Mia was quiet. She was usually cheerful after spending time with friends. Today, she was different. One more thing. When I tried to make love to her, she categorically refused. Usually, after a few drinks, Mia loves sex. This is what I expected. That didn't happen tonight. 2 days later, I received a message from Ryan O'Malley asking me to come over for that week's night. I became friends with Ryan and Teresa. Mia is smaller. Sometimes we'd hang out with them, but more often it was just Ryan and me, or even Ryan and Teresa and I together. I visited them on Thursday evening, and after all the greeting handshakes and hugs, we walked out onto their back deck. Teresa asked if I wanted a beer or anything, and I said no thanks. "You might need this, Pat," Ryan said seriously. Teresa returned with 3 bottles of beer. "What's happened?" I asked. They paused, and there was an uncomfortable silence. I saw Teresa's eyes welling up with tears. "Bad news last week," Ryan began. "Cancer. Pancreas cancer. Very bad." Ryan told me all the details. He had pain, he thought it would go away, didn't pass. Finally, he went to the doctor. Quite quickly, they ran additional tests and began working with an oncologist. "The forecast is maybe a year, according to them." His voice trembled with emotion as he said this. "Here's the thing," he told me. "We don't want a lot of people to know. We only tell family and a few close friends. I know you'll have to tell Mia, but I don't want this to go any further." I sat there, stunned, trying to process this terrible news. "What?" I began. "What can I do?" I asked. "Just be a good friend. Come by when you can," Ryan said. "And well, after that, be a friend to Teresa." He looked at her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Pat, you are one of the few true friends I trust. Teresa and I just wanted you to know," he told me. Later, while walking home, I shed my own tears thinking about what they told me. I knew I needed to hang in there to support Ryan and Teresa. Life went on, and I spent time with Ryan and Teresa whenever I could. Mia went with me a few times, but she seemed to make excuses to avoid these visits. She told me that it was difficult for her to think about death. When I told her it was difficult for everyone, she didn't respond. Looking back at this time in our lives, I realized that our relationship began to change. Very gradually at first, but looking back, we started moving in different directions. I spent a lot of time with Ryan, sometimes with Teresa too. A lot of my emotional energy was focused on my good friends. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was spending less energy on my marriage. At the same time, Mia began to work harder at her job at Langley Motors. Of course, we continued to function as a family, and with 3 young children, including twins, there was always something that needed to be done, so in many ways the shift between us was subtle. At first, as I have already explained, I had a tendency to be jealous. I know it may sound a little strange, but the scene at that party years ago, when I saw Mia walking down the stairs with Langley looking satisfied as if after sex periodically popped up in my mind. You may ask, why did you marry her if you didn't trust her completely? And the answer is, if she hadn't been pregnant, I doubt we would have ever gotten married. And I have to admit a few things. First of all, she is a great mom and has been a good wife for most of our marriage. And she never gave me any real reason to be suspicious. Finally, we have always had a strong emotional connection. Things started to change. Again, with work, kids, and the support of Ryan and Teresa, I was busy. Mia worked much harder than the original 20 hours a week. With the help of his mother and grandmother, the household was mostly under control. But this emotional connection has stretched. The first piece of the puzzle fell into place after a few weeks. I went to see Ryan. We started playing chess together. He was much better than me, but it was a good time. Teresa came home about an hour after I arrived. We chatted about normal things. "I saw Mia downtown last night," she told me. "In the center? She came home after dinner yesterday, but I thought she said she worked late." My curiosity intensified. "Where did you see her?" I asked calmly. Teresa said she saw her on Clancy Street in the area of restaurants, bars, and boutiques. Oh, really? I replied, still calm. Who was she with? Teresa looked at me intently. Ryan, with his pawn raised, stopped mid-swing and looked at me intently too. Teresa hesitated. I couldn't see. She stopped. I was driving down Clancy and I saw her. She's so pretty, it's hard to miss her. Is everything okay, Pat? Ryan asked. I tried to assure them that everything was fine, but I think they understood my outward behavior. A little while later, I left, walking a short distance from the house. Along the way, I tried to formulate how to ask her about being on Clancy Street feeding the kids. She didn't say anything about going out. That night, after the kids were all in bed, I asked her what she was working on at work. She said they were planning a big sale, so she was working late. I asked her if she needed to meet with the media from the local radio and TV stations. She explained that no, everything was done online. I rarely leave my office, she told me. Who approves the advertising campaign? I asked. First Mitch, and then finally Ryan, she replied. But then she looked at me. What about all these questions all of a sudden? She asked. I said I was just curious. She studied me, not believing my new curiosity. She suddenly fell silent and went upstairs. I sat in the kitchen, thinking. The conclusion was not difficult. I knew for sure that my wife had just lied to me. I just didn't know why. Over the next week or so, she was home early, participating in the raising of the children and trying to communicate with me more. If it weren't for my suspicions, this would have been a happy time for the family. The following week, she worked late on Monday, returning home after the children had gone to bed. And then, 2 days later, I received a text message from her. I have to work late. Mom can handle the kids' dinner. When the kids had finished eating, I told my mother-in-law that I needed to run a quick errand. She was glad to stay with the children. Driving past the car dealership, I looked for her black Highlander. I knew that employees parked on the north side of the building. You could see the parking lot from the road. Driving past, I didn't notice any cars in the parking lot. I knew Langley drove a Lexus SUV. No Lexus, no black Highlander. I checked my watch, 1936. I turned around and drove home, hoping and praying that Mia was there and our paths just didn't cross. Unfortunately, she was not there. She arrived at 15 minutes to 9. Her late evenings were getting later and later. She missed dinner with the kids. Where have you been? I asked. Where do you think I was? She answered, with a hint of irritation in her voice. Were you at work? I began. In your office? Of course I was. Where else could I be? Her tone became more and more negative. I sat on the couch, digesting the second lie. I hardly noticed when she left. I sat there for almost an hour, wondering what to do. All signs pointed to her doing something she didn't want me to know, most likely from Langley. The next day, Mia returned home at the usual time. She was happy and in a good mood. This was rare, and despite my suspicions, it resulted in an enjoyable evening, just like old times. Fun dinner with the kids, then bath, pajamas, teeth brushing, and reading. Their evening ritual. It was always more enjoyable when we both participated. Later, when I came down from the bedrooms, I found Mia in the living room with a glass of white wine. She was still in a good mood. We were invited to Blake's country house on Balthus Lake this Saturday. The children can go too, she told me. I didn't answer right away, digesting the information. Mitch and Lisa, Taylor, and a few others will be there, she added. The weather is going to be good. It will be fun. I paused before answering. I didn't really want to go with this group, but I really wanted to find out what was going on between Mia and Langley, or not. I agreed to go and told her I thought it would be fun. The next evening, Thursday, I went to Ryan and Teresa's. As I mentioned, they lived around the corner, a block and a half away. I hated to see it, but Ryan was clearly getting worse. He looked emaciated and his skin had an unnatural color. We spent some time discussing the latest medical news they had received. Unfortunately, there was nothing positive about this. However, both Ryan and Teresa maintained a good attitude, and I admired them for that. "What's going on with you?" Ryan asked me. "Everything is fine?" He looked at me with a worried expression on his face. I was ashamed. My friend was terminally ill, and my personal problems spoiled my mood. "It's okay," I told them, trying to create a more positive mood. "Hey, buddy, we're your friends. What's happening?" I sat there for a moment and then told them my suspicions about Mia and Langley. I started thinking about it after I saw her at the center a couple of weeks ago. I didn't see Langley there, but I had a feeling she was on some kind of date, Teresa said. Then I told them that she had lied to me about that evening. I told them about the strange watch. And finally, I admitted that I have no evidence, but it seems to me that our relationship is deteriorating. When I left, they promised their friendship and offered any help I might need. "Be careful on the lake this weekend," Ryan suggested. The weather was beautiful that Saturday, and we left before 9 in the morning. It was about an hour away by car. Several people stayed overnight, but for us, this was not possible with 3 children. The house was an old log home that had been modernized and expanded. There was a dock, a boat, and jet skis. There was a small sandy beach on one part of the lake, ideal for children. Mia and a few other moms settled down on a small beach. The children splashed in the shallow water. The women chatted, and I walked away. I wandered around the area, talked to others, and grabbed a beer. I spotted Langley, Mitch, Taylor, and a few others all together. From time to time, I heard Langley's loud voice. I also saw the lovely Olivia, a Langley girl, socializing. This calmed me down a little. After some time, Mia asked me to look after the children, and I agreed. I saw her, the now pregnant Lisa, and their friends talking near the house. I focused on the children, making sure they didn't go too deep into the water. From time to time, a jet ski passed us. The children were fascinated by the shiny watercraft and the loud noises they made. About half an hour had passed when I looked up and saw Mia's group, all together. I saw Lisa and a few other people, but I didn't see Mia. With one eye trained on the children in the water, I scanned the area from time to time to find her. I haven't seen her. I was on the verge of dragging the children onto dry land so I could take a closer look when I heard Langley's voice. I peeked out from behind one of the large evergreen trees and saw him with his arm around his girlfriend Olivia on the far edge next to the dock in a group of people. Perhaps there really was no reason to worry, I hoped. A little later, Mia appeared. "I can take care of the children now," she told me. She looked almost normal. Something was wrong, and I studied her, trying to understand what had changed. "What?" she began. "Why are you looking at me? I'll look after the kids, go have some fun." I wanted to clear my head, so I decided to take a walk along the west side of the lake. When we arrived, I noticed several paths leading in that direction. I was walking through the forest and came across a fork in the path. I took the inner path and continued walking along the narrow path, reflecting on my life. I took inventory. I had a good job that paid well, and I was good at it. I loved my children, and despite my recent doubts, I loved Mia too. Mia was a great mother, and we lived in a good area. There could have been very reasonable explanations for the discrepancies, I guess you could call them that, in her whereabouts on those few occasions. Encouraged by my optimistic thoughts, I decided to return to the party. I was walking along the inner path back, and suddenly I heard people talking. It seemed that they were on another branch of the path, the one closest to the lake. I stopped parallel to those who were speaking, obscured by thickets of deciduous trees. Without a doubt, I heard Langley's loud voice and knew that it was probably him and his friends. "And that's why we close early on Wednesdays," I heard Langley say, laughing, "to get that one on the table." Muffled sounds drowned out some of the comments. To see her, with this body, naked on the table. More unintelligible comments and laughter. "I've been looking forward to this all day on Wednesday. I can't wait to lock myself up." At that moment, a couple of jet skis rushed across the lake, and for several minutes I could not hear anything. Then there was a short, unintelligible conversation, and I heard someone else speak. As a company lawyer, I need to remind you of the policy against relationships at work, I heard Taylor Langley say in what I assumed was a serious voice. Then the jet ski rushed by again, drowning out some of the words. But through the noise, I heard a phrase that I thought I heard in muffled conversations. And what's more, Pat is a good guy, so. More noise from the lake, but I caught one final phrase, his wife. At that moment, all three jet skis rushed past. I couldn't make out anything else through the noise. The boys seemed to be returning, their voices becoming quieter as I sat hunched behind the thicket of trees. I sat there, digesting what I had heard. Although I couldn't hear everything that was said, it was pretty obvious what was going on. Langley slept with Mia at least every Wednesday night. It looked like it was on his desk after the car dealership closed, and then he bragged about it to his friends. Taylor, the company's lawyer, warned Langley of the possible consequences, and he seemed to have a tiny bit of sympathy for me. My joyful mood, which I had experienced just a few minutes ago, disappeared like a burst balloon. My suspicions were confirmed. Now I need to decide my strategy. Firstly, and this will be difficult, but I knew it was the right move, I needed to continue to behave normally, not show anger or suspicion. Then I needed to contact a lawyer. Methodically, I began the mental process of separating our lives. Throughout the day, I focused on two things: spend time with the kids and avoid Mia and Langley. All the way home, I tried to remain calm and maintain a neutral mood. From time to time, my thoughts returned to what I had heard, and I began to drive faster. "Patrick, slow down. The kids are in the car," Mia said. Luckily, everyone was tired after a day at the lake, and bedtime came early. For the rest of the weekend, I was busy with normal household chores. I avoided Mia as much as possible. I was afraid that my facade would crumble, and I was not prepared for the confrontation. More. Since I was working from home in my basement office, I needed to look outside the home for next steps. I knew I needed a lawyer, but didn't know one. I called both Tim Paris, my friend and financial advisor, and Ryan. I asked their opinion, explaining the situation and swearing it would remain a secret. "Can I share this sad news with Teresa?" Ryan asked. I told him, of course, but no one else. By the end of the week, I had found someone with a good reputation. At 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, I was in Myron Overby's office. I studied the man. He seemed soft and quiet. Several times I had to ask him to speak up. During the conversation, I began to worry. I was hoping to find some kind of violent shark. This guy looked like a pink-faced librarian, soft-spoken, and less than imposing in his suit and neat bow tie. "Do you have questions for me?" asked Myron. I hesitated. I just wasn't sure about this guy. I knew it would probably be a battle with Mia. I just wasn't sure that Myron was the person I wanted next to in the trench. Noticing my hesitation, Myron spoke. "Mr. Price," he began, "I noticed some doubt on your part. I understand. My manners are polite and thoughtful, I know," he added. "But please don't take my appearance as a sign of weakness. My clients always come out ahead. Always, I assure you." The last few sentences were spoken with a firm, icy calm. I could see others underestimating Myron and making mistakes in their strategies. I realized how competent and effective he could be. "Mr. Overby," I said, standing up and extending my hand across the table, "I have no doubt." We shook hands. Myron gave me a list of information he needed. We talked a little more. Finally, he asked me a specific question. "Have you spoken to your wife about any of your reasonable suspicions?" "Not really," I replied. Whenever I asked questions about her late nights and strange hours, she got angry. And before I overheard the conversations at the lake, I really didn't think that she could betray me like that. I mean, other than that, she was a good wife and a great mother. I sighed, holding back tears. The reality of the situation was starting to dawn on me. My life will change forever. "Is it possible that you could forgive her?" asked Myron. I sat for a while and thought about it. I really thought there was a chance that I could forgive her, I told Myron. "But I can never trust her again," I told him. Myron looked at me, folding his fingers into a pyramid, nodding. He then told me how he thought things would go. He stopped, looked at me, and asked one last question. Is it possible to get any physical evidence? Something, a text message or a photo? Asked Myron. Something with evidence might give us leverage. I sat there, thinking. After a few moments, I told him I might have an idea. When we broke up, we agreed to meet the following week. In the meantime, I began to develop a plan to obtain evidence. That week, I had a plan to obtain evidence. I knew Wednesday was the day the dealership closed early. I parked my car in a supermarket parking lot 2 blocks away and walked to Langley Motors. Around 4 o'clock, I stopped by to surprise Mia. I told her I was in the area. After a short visit, when no one was looking, I hid in the bathroom. I was sitting in a closed booth. Nobody came to check. I was waiting. A little after 6 in the evening, I went out into a dark car dealership. For several minutes, I stood still and listened. At first, everything seemed quiet. Then, faintly, I heard a woman's laughter somewhere deep in the building. It was impossible to tell who it was, but I remembered the conversation I overheard at the lake. Quietly, I crept up to Langley's office. The sounds outside the office door, still muffled, became louder. Moans and sighs made it obvious what was happening behind the closed door. Phone in hand, camera ready, I quietly turned the handle of the unlocked office door. I was greeted by the sight of Langley's bare bottom having sex with her on the table, as he had boasted about last Saturday. By the time I took the 4th photo, I realized I had made a huge mistake. As Langley continued, she looked up and screamed. A moment later, Langley saw me too. "What the heck?" he shouted. The partner, as it turned out, was not Mia. It was his girlfriend Olivia. She screamed for me to leave and for him to get off her. I caught a glimpse of Olivia lying naked on the table. In a train of thought, I completely understood why he chose to close early on Wednesdays. "What the hell are you doing here, Pat?" Langley shouted, pulling on his underwear. My impulse was to turn and run, but I knew that would create a much bigger problem later. I needed to explain myself, and maybe, just maybe, I could reduce my embarrassment. I started apologizing and saying that I had made a big mistake. To my surprise, Langley was not as angry as he should have been. With Olivia locked in Langley's private bathroom, I tried to explain. "Last week at a party at your country house, I overheard you and a few others talking on the path," I told him. He nodded, looking at me. It was hard to make out everything that was being said, but what I heard sounded like Mia was the one who was, I hesitated, on the table. At that moment, Olivia came out, fully dressed. Silently, she sat and listened to me explain. I told them I wanted proof, and that's how we ended up in this situation. I sincerely apologized to Olivia. She asked for my phone number. She flipped through the photos and then showed one to Langley. "I like this one," Olivia said with a smile. "Mia is a wonderful, attractive person, and I have known her for a long time, but I have no affair with her," Langley said with a strange expression on his face. "You wouldn't have been better off," Olivia added. I began to feel a slight sense of relief. They didn't seem particularly angry and even seemed to enjoy some of my photos. "Can I ask you a favor?" I told them. I asked them to let us forget about all this. I begged them not to tell anyone, especially Mia. I had enough shame at this point. "Pat, yes, we don't have to talk about it," Langley agreed. "One condition," he added. I nodded vigorously. I would do almost anything for their silence. "We'll keep the photos," Langley said with a smile. As I walked several blocks to pick up my car, I had several feelings. The first was embarrassment over my jealous mistake. The second was relief that Langley and Olivia were so reasonable about my mistake. And finally, a great feeling of happiness that my wife is not cheating on me. I obviously misinterpreted what was said at the lake. I promised myself on the drive home to be the best, most tolerant husband and not worry or ask her about her irregular schedule. She did something that satisfied her, and she was obviously good at it. I was happy for Mia. I began the process of repairing any broken relationships. I called my lawyer, Myron Overby, and told him to back off. After some questions, he agreed. Flowers, small gifts, massages. I tried to show Mia how much I appreciated her. I thought about what a wonderful mother she was, and I complimented her more often, assuring her that she knew how much I appreciated her. "What's gotten into you?" she asked one day after I sent her flowers to her office. I just said I love her and I love our family. There was a general atmosphere of happiness in the house, which was passed on to the children. When we all ate dinner together, the conversations were joyful and lively. One negative point that belied the increased happiness at home was Ryan's health. He rapidly deteriorated and often did not have the strength for our regular chess games. He and Teresa were the only people I trusted with my mistake of catching Blake Langley having his girlfriend on his office desk. Despite his deteriorating health, Ryan genuinely laughed at my mistake. Some of the last happy moments we spent together. Mia still sometimes worked late, disappeared without explanation, and gave slightly illogical answers to some questions. My new tactic was to simply accept and trust her, despite the strange explanations. Life went on for our busy family, and Mia's mom was an invaluable part of our home. She cared for the children when needed as Mia's hours at Langley Motors increased to full-time. One evening, Mia came home and told me she had to go to Denver for a dealer conference in 2 weeks. It was a 4-day trip, leaving on Sunday and returning on Thursday. "Who's going with you?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. She said she was going alone, but there would be other marketers from all over the country. Normally, I would have been suspicious and asked more questions, but I just kept repeating the mantra in my head: I trust her. I took her to the airport on Sunday, and she took off at 10:40 am on a flight to Denver. She called me around 1:30 p.m. to let me know she had made it, and the flight was uneventful. This week has been especially difficult with children. By Tuesday morning, I was on edge. Mia's mother noticed my condition when she arrived. "Why don't you relax and have dinner with a friend or something? Just rest tonight," she suggested. "I'll bring the children's grandmother. The two of us can handle it." I thought about it. She was right, I needed rest. I accepted her offer and planned to meet Tim Paris, my good friend and financial advisor, downtown in the Fur area. It was a popular place with bars, restaurants, and fashionable shops. We had a good dinner, but after dinner Tim had to go home. He had a 6 a.m. Zoom called his East Coast office. I looked at my watch. It wasn't even 7 o'clock yet. I walked across the street to Valentino's, a bar we'd been to before and liked. It was crowded, so I found a seat at the bar, ordered a glass of wine, and relaxed. About 10 minutes later, halfway through the wine, I heard someone call me. "Pat, what are you doing here?" It was Lisa Markham, Mia's good friend, Mitch's wife. It was nice to see a familiar face. She was at Valentino's with 3 other women at a table in the corner. I told her I was having dinner with a friend and just decided to have a drink before bed. She said they were having a bachelorette party and were waiting for a table at a restaurant. "Where's Mia?" she asked, using her short nickname. I explained that Mia was away on a business trip for a few days. "Oh yeah, I think she said she had to go somewhere," Lisa said. "Where's Mitch?" I asked. "He is also away. I was going to go with him, but he said something happened and it wouldn't work," she replied. "It's a pity that this happened. Besides the airport, I love Denver," she added. Suddenly, an icy shiver ran through my body. Did she say Denver? That's where Mia went. I needed to keep my cool, but I needed more information. "Mitch was traveling alone?" I asked calmly. She said yes. "When did he fly away?" I asked. "Sunday morning, on the morning flight. He arrived early in the day and will be back on Thursday," she said, adding, "Why are there so many questions?" I did my best to deflect her question and change the subject. We chatted a little more, and then Lisa's friends called her, since their table was ready, and she left. My suspicions increased. What a coincidence to meet Lisa, I thought. She never said she was traveling with someone. Definitely not with her boss, Mitch Markham. I decided to call Mia. I had a small hope that this might be some kind of communication error. Maybe there was a logical explanation. I dialed her number. We talked for a while, and I told her I had dinner with Tim. "What did you have for dinner?" I asked. "I just ordered it for my room," she replied. I asked her if she had met anyone she knew. She replied that no, she was alone. I paused for a second and then ended the call fairly quickly. Is it possible that Markham was in Denver for a separate reason? Possible, but unlikely. On the way home from the fur area, I came up with a plan. I needed the help of Mia's mother with the children. I thought through various details and had a clear idea of my strategy. On the flight to Denver, I got a middle seat. I was just glad I was able to find a place at all at the last minute. On the shuttle to the car rental place, I thought about my strategy. I was about to settle into the lobby of the Marriott Denver downtown where I learned she was staying. If she really was alone, my visit would be a pleasant surprise and we'd spend the weekend in Denver. If something happened to Markham, another meeting awaited us. It was around noon when I arrived at the Marriott. The hotel wasn't too busy. I positioned myself in a shaded corner. I had a baseball cap and a newspaper. I felt a little stupid sitting there, but I had to find out what, if anything, was going on with Mia. I sat and waited. Every time someone came in, I looked up. Around 5 p.m., the lobby became busier. 20 minutes later, I saw Mia arrive. She was alone and walking towards the elevator. She was also alone in the elevator. There was a floor indicator above the elevator door. I noted that the elevator stopped at the 8th floor. I looked at my watch. It was almost 5:30. I figured that if she was going to go out, the earliest it would be was 6:30 because I knew my wife's habits. I waited. 6:30 became 7, and as far as I could tell, she was still in her room. I suddenly began to feel hopeful. The hope that there might be some logical explanation for all this. I decided that if there was no activity before 7:30, I would call her and surprise her. 7:31, I stood up and found myself smiling. I actually came to the wrong conclusion. I reaffirmed my promise to trust her. I crossed the lobby, still wearing the ridiculous hat, heading towards the elevator and the 8th floor. I suddenly froze, then turned away from the elevator. I recognized the voice speaking loudly through the phone pressed to my ear. It was Markham. I hid behind a large flower pot with a plant. He was so focused on the phone conversation that he didn't even notice me. Through the leaves, I saw him press the up button for the elevator. Another couple entered. I watched as the floor indicator showed a stop on the 3rd floor, and then the elevator stopped at 8. I returned to the same secluded corner where I had been sitting all day. I wanted to face them, but by 8 o'clock, they still had not come out. It looks like they were staying in the room. It wasn't hard to guess what was happening. I just didn't know which room they were in on the 8th floor. I glanced at the store in the lobby. I improvised a plan. I asked the seller if they could deliver flowers to the guest. They said sure. I gave the name and asked for delivery as soon as possible. They agreed, saying they were not busy. I tipped the young salesman $20 to make the delivery as quickly as possible. Then I took the elevator to the 8th floor. There was a small sitting area next to the elevator overlooking each of the hallways where the rooms were. I was waiting. I saw the young salesman stop at the door at the end of the corridor. I counted 5th door on the right. There was a brief interaction and muffled conversation upon delivery. I walked down the opposite corridor when the seller left. Now I know the room number, 809. I went down to the 1st floor and used the phone in the lobby. I asked for cleaning. "Could you send some clean towels to 809? I asked. I again positioned myself next to the elevator on the 8th floor. This time it took a little longer. I heard the ding of the elevator stopping on the 8th floor, and then the rumble of a cleaning cart heading towards 809. There was a short knock, and then the maid shouted, "Cleaning." I stood silently right behind the maid. I saw her insert the key card and open the door a crack, holding the towels in her hands. That was enough. I pushed past the surprised hotel clerk and saw Mitch Markham naked. "What?" he spoke, finally realizing who it was. "Pat, what are you doing?" he asked in surprise. "What?" Mia shouted, alarmed. "She hasn't seen me yet." Markham approached me with both arms outstretched, palms up, in a stopping gesture. My pent-up rage carried me towards him, and my right fist sank into the soft fat of his belly. With a cry of oof, he collapsed into a sitting position on the floor. I stepped over him and saw Mia, topless, in a small bikini, on the bed. I also noticed flowers on the bedside table. "Patrick!" she exclaimed. I just looked at her, absorbing what was happening. Even after I called housekeeping, I still hoped that I would see them fully dressed, looking at the sales charts. No, there was only one explanation for what happened. It was obvious. And as I watched, Mia began the usual list of illogical excuses. "It's not what I think, it was the first time, it was only sex, she loved me," and so on. Despite my emotional rage, I remembered enough to pull out my phone and take a photo. Mia tried to cover herself with the sheet. Markham sat down on the floor. I didn't. After one last look at Mia, who was now sobbing and begging for forgiveness, I turned to leave. "Don't," I began in a hissing whisper. "Think about going back to my house." When I left, I heard her sobbing answer. "Sorry, where should I go? This is also my home." I didn't answer. The whole way home, I decided I wasn't going to be a good guy. All the feelings of betrayal and lies surfaced. I vividly remembered the feelings I had felt years ago when I saw her and Langley together at that party. It was similar, but worse, much worse. I had numerous text messages and voicemails from her. On Myron's advice, I saved them all. "We might need this," he told me. When I arrived, I told everything to her mother. She became an integral part of our home, helping with Michael and the twins. I couldn't figure out how to explain Mia's absence. It also felt good to humiliate Mia and spread misery to her mother. Her mother was shocked. The next call was from Lisa Markham, good friend of Mia. She exploded with anger. "I told him last time, if he ever does it again, it'll be over." Last time? Will he do it again? Clearly, this was not new territory for Markham. Needless to say, this will affect Mia and Lisa's long-term friendship. Fine, I thought. I know I was vindictive, but I couldn't help myself. I was angry. And besides being angry, I was hurt. Very wounded. Hurt by what she did to me, and more importantly, how it will affect the children. We were about to take them out of a loving home where parents lived together, into a world of shared custody, less stability, compromising finances, and part-time parenthood. Mia obeyed my wishes and stayed away from the house. At first, it was Sunday. I took the kids for a short walk in the mountains. Everyone was tired and hungry when we returned home. Mia was sitting in the kitchen when we arrived. The children, who kept asking, "Where is Mommy?" attacked her. No matter what might have happened, there was no denying that Mia was a good mother, and the children missed her. As she interacted with the children, hugged and played with them, I noticed how she checked my facial expressions, quickly glancing at me, trying to understand my emotions. I remained silent. Stone Buddha, my face was blank. Mia prepared a delicious dinner for the children and me. There were times when even for me all this seemed normal, but it was impossible to ignore the dark cloud of lies and betrayal, invisible to the children, that hung over our home. The rest of the evening was spent getting Michael and the twins ready for bed. In our house, this was not a short process. Bathing, pajamas, stories, and finally sleep. I sat in the living room, the TV off, waiting for the confrontation I had so far avoided. I knew the time had come. Silently, Mia entered the living room and sat on the edge of the chair opposite me on the sofa. She studied my face without saying a word at first. Finally, taking a deep breath, she began her apology. "I need to explain myself," she finally said. "All through high school at St. Thomas, I was a good girl. It was drilled into my head by my mother and grandmother that sex was only for marriage." I've heard this before. I considered this to be Langley's explanation. She then talked about her crush on Mitch in high school. Then, when they started working together, they became closer. One thing led to another, and as she explained, they started sleeping together. "But I'll never do that again. I'll agree to anything you want. Please, Patrick." I'll even quit my job, she told me. Don't do this, I told her. No, she asked, looking puzzled. You'll need money. Mia fell silent. It seemed that the practical consequences of her actions were beginning to sink in. This house, our lifestyle, our plans for our children will probably all change. Patrick, I love you. Don't you have room in your heart to forgive me? Please, she begged. I don't think you understand what you've done. I told her. She tried to interrupt, but I continued to speak through her attempt to interrupt. Forgive, perhaps in time, the children and I will forgive you, but I can no longer trust you. I told her. Children, she asked. Why are you talking about children? I sat studying it. I was surprised how she, a reasonably intelligent woman, did not understand. Mia, I said, it's not just my life you ruined, it's the children's lives too. She sat and looked at me with a perplexed expression on her face. Joint custody, 2 separate homes, potential stepfathers, compromising finances. This is the world they get because you slept with Mitch Markham, I told her. Her face wrinkled. Finally, she began to understand the full consequences of her actions. Through tears, she begged for forgiveness. You loved me enough to marry me, she sobbed. Can't you find that love again? The reality, Mia, I told her, I married you because you were pregnant with our child. I wanted to give this child, Michael, a strong future. You just ruined that. If you weren't pregnant, I would never have married you. I didn't mince words. She needed to feel as bad as I did. No, Mia, I continued. To me, you were not the woman I wanted as a wife. Of course, we had fun, but life, especially as a parent, comes with an obligation. That obligation is to raise your children responsibly so that they become productive members of society. I wasn't confident in your ability to take on this responsibility. I continued, but you surprised me. I have to say, you're doing a great job being a mother. But I can't say you're doing a good job as a wife. Now I'm tired. I'll go sleep in the basement on the futon. Bye. Patrick, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. Another, I said, ignoring her apology. She looked at me hopefully. You should probably get a lawyer, I told her. I heard her sobs as I walked to the basement. Somehow, some way, life went on almost as if her betrayal had not happened. Almost, we still lived together under the same roof. For children, their world was normal. Mom and Dad and the children all lived together. Perhaps they didn't notice that I rarely spoke to Mia, and there was absolutely no physical interaction. No hugs, no holding hands, no kisses goodbye. There was hardly any dialogue unless it was absolutely necessary. That doesn't mean Mia didn't try. In the evening, after the children fell asleep, she apologized again and again. I rejected and stopped any attempt at physical contact. It was like living in 2 worlds. One world as the children stayed awake, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, and then the times when it was just Mia and I, where there was a cold war going on in our relationship. It was an unpleasant atmosphere. Dark time in my life, and it got worse. No, our house with the described dysfunction continued. Something else darkened the atmosphere of my life. It was Ryan. He was in full hospice care. Doctors said that his life could be measured in days. I visited him and Teresa tried to remain cheerful, but little was enough to destroy her facade of positivity. One day, near the end, I was sitting with Ryan while he was taking a nap. I was quiet, just sitting there, when suddenly Ryan grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength. I looked at him, and for a moment his eyes were clear. "Promise me," he whispered. "Patrick, promise me." He repeated. "Anything," I said, nodding my head, ready to do whatever was necessary. It took him a few minutes to gain strength, but he finally whispered to me, "Take care of Teresa." I promised him I would. 3 days later, Ryan died. The funeral was sad and good at the same time. I spoke briefly about our friendship and what a good man he was. And then life went on, kind. The atmosphere of the house was all about children. Mia continued to be a good mother. Following my advice, she remained at work at Langley Motors, and Mia's mother was a constant fixture in our home. My goal was to maintain a sense of normalcy for the kids, but behind the scenes things were happening. That Tuesday evening, I met with Myron Overby to discuss options for ending my marriage. What he told me was not reassuring. The stress that Mia felt was constant. The only relief was short periods of sleep caused by fatigue. Even the joy of communicating with children was intense. There was constant pressure that Mia put on herself. If I'm not a good mother, Patrick won't need me. Mia recalled a terrible conversation with Patrick after a terrible trip to Denver. He was so cold. He told her that if she had not been pregnant, he would never have married her. It was a sharp knife that went in cleanly. He accused her, through her actions, of sabotaging the children's future, stability, and happiness. Constant pressure forced her to compensate for her mistake. Errors. She needed to make up for her mistakes by being the best mother she could be. And it was difficult. She tried to talk to Lisa, her best and oldest friend, but Lisa called her names and said that she ruined her marriage. In the end, Lisa said she never wanted to talk to her again. Fortunately, she kept her job at Langley Motors, but she was called to Blake and told that she should not communicate with Mitch. Mitch was demoted, and Mia noticed that he was now avoiding her. It was probably for the best, but the whole company knew about their affair. She heard and actually heard some of the hurtful gossip. It was humiliating. If she had a choice, she would have quit, but Patrick said she would need the money. The only person she could really talk to was her mother. She discussed her actions and the shaky state of her marriage. But although her mother was great with children and a good cook, she didn't understand the situation. Patrick will come to his senses. In time, he will learn to forgive you, her mother told her. For Mia, it seemed incredible. Mia summed up her life like this: a failed marriage, a humiliating work environment, and constant pressure at home to be the perfect mother. All this because she slept with a guy who, looking back, she didn't even like that much. Oh, and by the way, he was married to her now ex-best friend. It's likely you'll get joint custody, Myron said, but it's also likely that if you keep the house, your wife will stay in it. If you sell the house, the proceeds will be split, and perhaps there will be enough for each of you to afford a small house or apartment. I sat and thought. I loved this house. It was perfect for children. They started making friends in the area. The school they all had to go to was nearby. I remembered when we bought the house and how perfect it was for our family. I continued to sit in Myron's office, my fingertips unconsciously tapping the surface of the desk, thinking about the many bad options for my life. The thought of taking my kids out of their home and forcing them to move into some cramped apartment was not what I wanted. Maybe there's another option. Myron paused and said, "It's become a little more popular, although given the circumstances, it's not ideal." I nodded silently, urging him to continue. Myron explained that he could draw up a postnuptial agreement. Of course, I've heard of a prenuptial agreement, but not this one. Myron explained that it is a document for a married couple that outlines a series of legal agreements between husband and wife to protect them financially and personally. "What will be in the document?" I asked. He explained that we could include whatever we agreed on, but this would be a decision about children and home. Essentially this: we would have stayed married. Financially, we would have our own accounts, investments, and pensions. Monthly expenses would be divided in proportion to our individual income. We would make a fair division of the cost of the house many years later when the children are older. Specifically, when the twins turn 18, the agreement states that the house will be sold and the profits will be split 50-50 unless we both agree to keep it. But if one of us wants to leave, the house will be sold. The other thing that will happen at this point is that either of us will be able to get an uncontested divorce. The assets will be divided 50-50, and either of us will be able to buy out the other's share at a reduced price. Otherwise, it will be split as above. We would function as married roommates. In addition, there will be rules regarding guests in the house. Neither of us could bring a date home. Any external romantic relationships should be hidden from your spouse and children. We discussed this a little more. It wasn't ideal, but it might be the least bad alternative. I asked Myron to prepare something while I thought about this option. Perhaps someday, much later in their adult lives, the children will understand the sacrifices made for their stability, I thought. I could not believe it. When Patrick came into the kitchen with a large envelope, I thought they were divorce papers. Tears welled up in my eyes when he began to speak, and in the middle of his speech, I realized that I was mistaken. This document was something else. The point is that we both stay in the house. He will end up with a room in the basement, next to his office. And this will be his bedroom. At least for now. We'll still be married, but we'll be more like roommates raising kids together. There were many other details, but most of them did not come into force until many years later. I wasn't going to worry about it now. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to change a few things by then. This was the lifeline I needed. There were rules and restrictions that I willingly agreed to. I didn't even read the whole document. I signed it before Patrick finished explaining it to me. Outwardly, I was glad that we would not separate the children and sell the house. Secretly, I hoped that I could win him back. I remembered how we broke up right after college. Then I was able to return it. I felt like I had a chance to do it again. It was a little awkward at first. I was still very angry at his betrayal. Seeing him every day and seeing him act so normal bothered me. Although I was warm and loving towards the children, I tried to subtly ignore Patrick. I fenced off the area next to my office in the basement and built a bedroom there. This did not seem abnormal to the children, and their lives continued without knowledge of the rupture in the relationship between their parents. This was the deal that Mia and I made, and it was outlined in the postnuptial agreement. The future and happiness of the children were a priority. Keeping them alive came at a cost to both of us. One of the problems was that it was not easy for me to have any kind of personal life. I quickly realized that one of the first questions a potential woman would ask is, "Are you married?" In the second sentence, when I started with, "Yes, but," the woman left. The only potential would be a woman I already knew well, and who would have the patience to understand the situation. Unfortunately, there were few such women. Of course, one of the sacrifices I had to make was the absence of any sexual relations. Over time, it became more and more difficult. Patrick was still a little angry, I could feel it. Even though we did things together as a family and usually ate dinner together, he seemed to focus all his attention on the children. It was good for now, but I wanted our old life back. When we were together, it's okay, I thought. I was playing the long game. I had time. I'd done this before, and I knew him so well that I was pretty sure I could get him back. And I had a strategy. On Fridays, I usually met up with a few single friends at Red Caboose, a sports bar with an upscale dating lounge. The boys and I loved this place because of the big screens and the occasional attractive girls who loved it too. The problem I had was that most people who knew me, and there were many, knew me as a married man. When I tried to explain that my wife and I had an open marriage, it sounded even dirtier. Needless to say, any woman, knowing about my situation, who would be interested in me, I usually did not like. It reminded me of the old Groucho Marx joke. I wouldn't want to join a club that would accept me as a member, or something like that. This created disappointment for me in many ways. Sexually, of course, but also as a companion to do things with. Several months passed, and I was still playing the game at home. Yes, I understood that the children were the #1 priority, but I felt that things were progressing with Patrick too. He wasn't as rude to me when the kids weren't around, and I noticed that he noticed me. Very subtly, I started wearing more revealing clothes. Sometimes he saw me not fully dressed. I was sure that he found me attractive. He always thought that way. I was also relatively sure he wasn't dating someone. Of course, I wasn't sure, but except for the rare Fridays when he went to Caboose, he was usually home in the evenings. I started to develop a plan. I knew that after a few drinks, he usually wanted sex. Of course, I knew his habits over the years of our marriage. I knew what he wanted and what turned him on. It was Friday night, and he was with the guys at Red Caboose. I was wearing only a towel, as if I had just taken a shower. I knew that he usually returned home around 11:30. Peering out the window, I saw the Uber headlights turn onto our street. I hurried to the refrigerator. Strategically, I inserted a corner of the towel into the refrigerator, closing the door on that corner. I took my water bottle. I waited. I heard the door open. I knew my timing had to be right. I heard him approach the corner and enter the kitchen. "About," I said, pretending to be scared, and got up from behind the refrigerator. "Oh." With these words, the towel stuck in the refrigerator slipped off, and I was left standing naked in front of it. "You scared me," I said, standing naked. Silently, he approached me. He grabbed my breasts, fondling them roughly. "Patrick," I whispered, feigning slight reluctance. "What are you doing?" I started, and then his mouth covered mine. He picked me up and threw me harshly onto the kitchen table. It was over quickly, but it was satisfying, especially for Patrick. He gallantly helped me down from the table, kissed me on the cheek, groped my breasts again, and went into the basement. I was hoping to get him into my bed, but this was definitely a step in the right direction. Although my hopes for continued intimacy were not immediately realized, the coldness in our interactions began to melt. I knew Patrick and became more and more confident that everything would change. Things progressed uneventfully. Apart from the time I caught her naked in the kitchen one Friday, our relationship remained platonic. But there were many nights when I lay in the basement with arousal, tempted to climb the stairs and find sexual satisfaction. Ultimately, I knew it wasn't right. It would send her the wrong message. She was still a beautiful, sexy woman, but I needed more than that in a relationship. My close friends knew everything about the situation between Mia and me. Days became weeks, weeks become months, and suddenly dysfunction in our lives became the norm. I was neutral towards Mia, and she was very kind to me. Those months turned into years. Mia's mom still helped out, and Mia continued her job at Langley Motors. The children went to school and life went on. Suddenly, I discovered a pleasant change in my life. It happened so suddenly that I was surprised. Time passed for us, but it was pleasant. I loved children, and now that the twins were in school, there was a normality that I felt lucky to have. My work was great. Mitch moved to California, so I didn't have to confront him and remind him of my mistake. Somehow, I had to get Patrick back. Lately, he seemed in high spirits, happier. Sometimes, when all the children had their own things to do, we were left alone. These moments were pleasant and friendly, but he avoided any attempt at physical, sexual contact. He stopped going to caboose with friends. It was bigger than the house. He started walking in the evenings, leaving the house after dinner for a couple of hours 2 or 3 times a week. I asked where he went, and he simply answered, "Somewhere." It was okay. I was just glad he wasn't hanging out with girls at the bar anymore. This positive mood continued. Patrick stopped going to the bar and started going out in the evenings. My mood has improved. Patrick and I became closer. Sometimes he kissed me goodbye. It wasn't a long, passionate kiss, more like a light kiss on the cheek, like you would give to a brother or sister. Sometimes I would try to turn around to get some lip contact, but he would avoid it and then just laugh like it was a joke. I was increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress with Patrick, but on the other hand, we were still living together. My mother supported me. She encouraged me with positive comments. "Sometimes it takes time," she said, "but I can see he cares about you." These words gave me strength. I just hoped they were true. The years continued without change. Suddenly, it seemed Michael had left for college, and the dynamics in the house changed. The twins were busy with school, activities, friends, and boyfriends. Patrick and I were both busy with our work. But one night, Patrick said we should take a family vacation to celebrate the twins' high school graduation. In all these years, we have never traveled together. I thought this was progress. "I'd like to take your mother too," said Patrick. She was definitely a part of all of our lives, and on the one hand, I was glad that Patrick included Mom, but on the other hand, I thought that this might be a chance for Patrick and I to increase our intimacy. 3 days later, my mother was at our house when I returned from work. She looked excited about something. She could be a nuisance. "Did you know about this?" she asked me with a wide smile on her face. "About what?" I asked. She smiled and handed me several printed sheets of paper. When we talked to the twins about a vacation, they both agreed to a trip to Disneyland. Even though they were on the verge of growing up, they were still kids at heart, and that's where they wanted to go. Apparently, my mom was rummaging through Patrick's office while he was out of town. I reviewed the documents for the trip to Southern California and the details of the trip to Disneyland. I knew all this. Why is my mom so excited? I looked up. "Keep reading," she told me. At first, I didn't understand. The documents indicated further plans for a trip for two after Disneyland. To Hawaii, I continued reading. Hapuna Beach Hotel on the Big Island for two. The trip will be right after a trip to Disneyland. A week in Hawaii. Finally, I understood why my mother was so excited. It was supposed to be a surprise for me. "Mom," I began, "you need to put everything back in its place, exactly the way you found it." That night, Patrick called me from a meeting. He said he wanted to talk to me about something, but not on the phone. I happily agreed. He said he would be back the next evening and suggested we have dinner at Pasta House, a small Italian restaurant we had gone to before. I was excited. I thought he was going to tell me about his trip to Hawaii. I returned home on Friday afternoon. Mia hadn't gotten home from work yet. I sent her a message. "Need to run errands. Meet me at Pasta House at 6:30. I left the house with a spring in my step. I was nervous and excited. I saw him sitting in a booth as I walked along the sidewalk to Pasta House. There was some kind of document lying on the spot next to him. It was supposed to be a trip to Hawaii. I smiled widely as I sat down. I wanted to kiss him, but it was a little awkward, so I just sat down. "How are you traveling?" I asked, and we spent a few minutes chatting about small things. There was a pause in the conversation, and Patrick began to speak. "Mia, as you know, our relationship over the years," I began, "ever since this whole thing with Mitch, has been unconventional, to say the least." Mia smiled silently and nodded in agreement. But despite all those early conflicts, we found a way to work things out. We both sacrificed for the kids' stability, and look at them, I smiled and said. Michael is pursuing his engineering degree, Cleo has been accepted to Stanford, and Claire has been accepted to Notre Dame. We both have a lot to be proud of, I told her. At that moment, I picked up the documents and put them on the table. Mia, still smiling, looked at the materials, and then her face changed. She looked puzzled. "Now that the twins are out of school, I've used our postnuptial agreement. You're now free to date whoever you want without worrying about kids. We'll be officially divorced in 60 days. She looked at me, shocked. "Mia, you will always be a part of my life. There were times when I was very angry with you, but over the years I have mostly gotten over it." I told her, "I consider you a good friend." I said with pleasure. She looked at me, her smile replaced by a puzzled expression. "Friends, divorce. Patrick, I love you." She almost screamed. "I don't want a divorce." I studied her, puzzled. "Mia, the postnuptial agreement says it all." "Here it is," I said and pushed the documents towards her. "You agreed to this. Here is your signature at the bottom of the page," I said, pointing to the signature. "But what about the trip to Hawaii?" she asked, with despair in her voice. "Hawaii?" I said. Now I was puzzled. "How did you hear about the trip to Hawaii?" She sat without answering. "I'm going to Hawaii with Teresa," I told her. "With Teresa?" she almost screamed. Right after Ryan died, I spent a lot of time with Teresa. Despite the problems I had with Mia, I knew I had to support Teresa. For several months, I visited her several times a week. I remembered the promise I made to Ryan in his last days. But after some time, it became a burden for me. It was awkward, and at first I didn't know why. I knew it was partly out of sadness over losing a friend, but it was more than that. My feelings for her became romantic. It felt like a betrayal of my late friend. So I stopped visiting Teresa. This was right when I started going to Red Caboose. It was an empty time in my life. I had no personal life, and I remembered the only time I had spontaneous sex with Mia. I knew right away that it was a mistake. I started living a different lifestyle with the promise of being healthy. I focused on my children and work. Luckily, both of these parts of my life were going well. During this time, I started walking several miles after dinner, 2 or 3 times a week. My route took me past Teresa and Ryan's house. Well, now only Teresa, but I couldn't help but think about him as I passed by. One summer evening, as I walked by, I saw her watering the flowers on the porch. We started talking, and she joined me for a walk. It became a habit, and we started going for walks regularly. As much time as we spent together, it was hard for me not to notice how attractive Teresa was. Not Mia's curvy figure, more like a long-distance runner's. Slim, with a little fat, but with beautiful breasts and legs. I reproached myself. It was the widow of my late friend. I remembered the promise I made to him. I spent a lot of time with Teresa, and our friendship grew stronger. We started hugging each other goodbye. The contact was short, but even in its brevity, I felt surges of sexual desire. I kept reminding myself that she was Ryan's widow. One summer evening, we were walking, and it started to rain unexpectedly. We were the furthest away from her house, so when we returned, we were both wet and cold. "Open the wine," Teresa told me. "I'll take a quick shower." While I was in the kitchen with wine, I heard her voice from the corridor. "What?" I said without hearing her. Finally, I saw a bare hand emerge from the door. I caught a glimpse of her stomach and part of her chest. I said, "You can get me a towel. They're in the laundry room." Mixed feelings filled me as I walked towards the laundry. Attraction, guilt, and, of course, desire. I started. "Should you leave it here?" I asked, unsure. At that moment, the door opened slightly, and her hand grabbed my arm and pulled me into the bathroom. Teresa stood in front of me, smiling and naked. I just froze and watched. After a moment, she smiled and said, "Take off your clothes and come in. It's cold here," she told me. And then, "It's about time." You can imagine what happened next. I washed her and examined her slender body. We began the second circle in her bed. I stayed the night, knowing that I would have to leave early before Mia and the children woke up. I remembered the marriage contract. The next day, when I came to Teresa, it was awkward. Almost everything is from my side. After 10 minutes of my strange behavior, she asked what was going on. It's good that our friendship was strong enough to have such conversations. "I feel like I'm cheating on Ryan," I finally said. She fell silent and looked at me. "I want to tell you about our last conversation," Teresa began. She said Ryan told her he felt guilty about dying. He felt like he was letting her down. "Promise me you'll find a good man to spend your life with," he told her. She protested and said no one could take his place. Holding her hand, he slowly closed his eyes, then with surprising strength, opened them wide and whispered with a small smile, "Patrick." "You see," she told me, "he's already given us his blessing." A few years passed, the twins were still in college, and Michael's big day arrived. The postnuptial agreement went smoothly. Myron did well. Mia tried to protest, but the agreement was strong. I married Teresa. It was a small ceremony. Teresa's brother Tim, a good friend of mine, was my best man. I moved into Teresa's house, and Mia stayed in our family home. Michael married his college girlfriend, Bridget. She was a wonderful young woman, and I was glad they were together. Late in the evening at the reception, I found myself alone at the table. Perhaps having drunk an extra glass of champagne, I looked around, feeling satisfied. Apparently, it was Michael's lucky day as I watched him and Bridget dance. Claire was dancing with her boyfriend, a big guy named Daniel who played football at Notre Dame. I liked him. Cleo was applying to medical school and claimed that she had no time for men. She danced alone next to her sister. Teresa was as beautiful as ever, and I saw her happily talking to a group of people. I was in a state of slight intoxication and a feeling of satisfaction. At that moment, I felt someone sit down in the unoccupied seat next to me. It was Mia. I turned and looked at her. She had gained weight, and the stresses of life were visible on her face. She has aged. Are you having a good time? I asked kindly. Things had been strained between us since we talked at the pasta house. She acted like she was mad at me. Yes, I think, she said, I'm very happy for Michael. He's a good guy, and he's going to marry the right woman. There was a moment of silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. And then I saw tears streaming down her face. What's happened? I asked. Mia, you were a great mother, I said, trying to cheer her up. A good mother, perhaps, she said, standing up and not looking at me, but not a very good wife. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.